Raw episode 61, I believe. This is exciting. I was glad to get episode 2 of season 5 out yesterday. Our conversation with Shay was deeply, deeply interesting. I really enjoyed that conversation so much. I do want to say a few things quickly, and then I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, who I believe is currently setting up his Instagram live. The first thing is that it is a Friday, and 3 more Fridays, I'll be in Colorado. It's coming up fast. I'm very excited about this. There are, of course, 2 mini retreats. There's the first weekend, which is the mini retreat. Let me try that again. The mini retreat. And then the second weekend, which is the mini retreat. I'm so excited for both of these events, as well as karaoke in the middle of that on June 14th on Wednesday. Again, if you'd like to know where, do join us on Patreon. It's only $5 a month, and you will be the first to know where we're doing karaoke in Denver on the 14th. Other than that, we'll probably announce it the day of from social media and whatnot. And if you're in the Denver area, you can join us, because I know Andrew has just been fucking singing it up lately. So I am stoked for our next adventure at karaoke. I do want to remind everyone that it is the 19th today of May. There is still a coupon code that you can use to save 25% off of any one of our workshops. It's code YesYouMay, all one word. I can't recommend the workshops enough. Admittedly, they are a deep dive into each of the subjects that we've chosen for those workshops. They're a lot of fun, but it's great to be able to just focus on one subject and really dig into it. Like the social anxiety workshop, there's a lot of good there. There's a lot of good there. The manifestation workshop, I thought, was just fucking incredible. And the reason I say that is because I hate the woo. I'm really not about fluff. Like, I hate that shit of you just have to envision it and you'll get what you want. It's like, why do you want it? Oh, I don't want to talk about that. Like that kind of thing. And it's just like, there's so much to it, because manifestation is not something that you're going to do. It's something you are. Your constant manifestation. It just means what's evident. And we get into a lot of the details of that in that workshop. So go and check that out. If you're coming out of Christianity or religion and you're trying to let that programming and conditioning go, the Beyond Belief workshop is probably one of my personal favorites, because we really get into the difference between belief and recognition. And so there's also a dating and relationships workshop. And if you're interested in coaching, there's a coaching workshop, which actually is great preparation for our mentorship program, which we're going to be offering later this year. That's it, Andrew. I'm going to pass it to you and do the YouTube thing. I'll be right back.
Sounds great. Yeah, it really is so funny with the manifestation, just how much confusion it's rooted in, like you being something that manifests versus you being the manifestation. It's very similar to you being someone experiencing life as opposed to just being life. I think those sorts of recognitions kind of go hand in hand, because when your experience here and now is the end all be all, there's no spot that you're running to or trying to get to. You can actually fully experience reality. Like if you're doing the mainstream manifestation bullshit, you're not fully experiencing reality, like ever. When you're doing the journal writing, when you're on your way to getting it, when you get it, like it's all circling around. And yes, I understand, technically you are in reality because you always are reality, but you can, you're powerful enough to confuse yourself into thinking that you're not. And as you're going through that, like you're trying to build and maintain an idea that doesn't actually exist. Like that idea just doesn't actually exist in reality. So you're running towards a way to give yourself an excuse to recognize your value while you're 100% valuable the entire time. So it just becomes sort of silly. So yeah, I mean, technically there's nothing wrong with manifesting. There's nothing wrong with doing anything, but the reason that you're doing it is because you're confused. The reason that you're doing it is because you're confused about what you are, and the process of doing it, the action of doing it, the achievement of it is just reinforcing that confusion, reinforcing that illusion. And anything that does that is just reinforcing where your suffering comes from, whether it's trying to get to a certain spot, trying to get what you want, believing in God, believing in stories, believing in ideas. Like it all reinforces the fucking root of your suffering, and we keep doing it. Anything you identify as well. Like I've been going through it on, I just posted a clip from Raw 58 about how being a shopaholic, you know, doesn't exist, and it reinforces your idea of yourself. It reinforces your story. It only does a lot of harm long term, and it kind of validates your behavioral patterns that aren't actually inherent to what you are. And so there's all sorts of comments going kind of crazy on that. So we'll see how that ends up, but it's been kind of fun. But it's just interesting that how rooted in that confusion all of these things are, that perception of division taken as truth.
Well, we actually start to think that the concept is going to save us. Like that's what you're going to hear. It's like it's important for us to have that label so we can recognize, what we're dealing with. It's like you need the label to recognize what you're dealing with. Like there's a very big difference between having alcoholic tendencies and being an alcoholic, right? It's the whole point is that if you take it as self-identifying, it becomes self-fulfilling. And I've known a great many quote unquote alcoholics over time who just they can't have a drink. They can't have one drink. They just don't have the power. And it's because ultimately they never dealt with the danger, right? Or rather where the habit was coming from. They've just learned to avoid the consequence, right? And I understand, I understand. At one point, you would have heard me say, "Hi, I'm Ray, and I'm an alcoholic." At one point in my life, that was very much the case, and I identified as such for a while to protect myself, ultimately, right? But at the end of the day, it's not the case. The case was that I was suffering, I was hurting, I was irresponsible, and I was looking for an escape, and it was an easy one, right? And then it became a habit, one that was so easy to keep doing because you're so unconscious in doing so. And that's ultimately where most habits end up coming from, is a desire to be less aware, right? And because if we do something habitually, we don't have to be aware of it each and every time that we do it. So yeah, it's interesting. It's not like you're saying the problem of alcoholism doesn't exist. You're saying you, the person that's experiencing it and suffering through it, are not actually doomed by virtue of this label being attached to you forever. Now, I know immediately the response is, well, that's dangerous because what if one day they start drinking again? What if one day they do? What if one day they've managed to work through all the shit that led them down that dark path and they are in a state of awareness and responsibility? They treat the substance with respect. They're aware of the impact that it has on them. And as such, they make a mature decision to enjoy it from time to time. Is that so bad? Is that not the relationship that ideally would have existed to begin with, if not for running away from something, if not for trying to escape some pain, some suffering? We are not these labels. It's just that it gives us comfort in the same way that, as I told you before, somebody who's quit smoking will often vilify people who smoke. Why? Because that will keep them away from the habit that they have deemed to be bad for them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, except that you're a dick, vilifying everyone who is doing the thing that you did not that fucking long ago, right? And you don't need to do that, whereas you can just exercise willpower. But that said, there's a transition period. I get that, in the same way that I identified as an alcoholic for a little while until I started to recognize, oh, right, that, I can see where that's getting in the way. It was something I needed to learn from, and so for me, that was a journey. And sometimes that's the point. But I love the fact that you're making the point, but you're going to piss off a lot of people because you're challenging the holy grail, labels, right? If I have a label, I know what I am. Then I just have to deal with that label. I have to deal with all the things associated with that label, because that label defines my fucking universe. And it does. Everything goes through the label, right? And it's not until you let it go that you start to recognize you have free will, responsibility, awareness, all that other fun stuff, that you're actually, an influence over your own life. Until then, you're influenced by your label.
It's like solely your label. Like that is the entire focus. The things that you've labeled yourself as is all that you see. all your brain tries to confirm, all you try and overcome. It's like you're not even looking at reality for what it is at all. And it's whether it's the labels or the addictions, like what's the alternative to that? Well, the alternative is not knowing. The alternative is uncertainty. The alternative is looking at reality for what it is, as opposed to through these fucking veils and lenses that they don't have anything to do with you. Like they're just assumptions. There's no objective confirmation like this is exactly what you are. And I don't get, and I know it's just like I do get to a degree, but like, all right. So how, when someone has a certain addiction, how do people not recognize that it's an escape from something? And if they overcome, say, alcoholism without looking at the root of where it's coming from, how do they not realize that that person's just going to find another way to escape?
I don't want to. No, that's it. That really is it. Like you'll find that we're almost deliberately short-sighted. We really are. Like we'll focus on the homeless problem, for example. Here in British Columbia, there's a big homeless problem. And it's because the price of rent here is fucking ridiculous. Like it's ridiculous. I think there was a study recently done by University of British Columbia. I think it was. I could be wrong. I might be misciting that. But basically, in a recent 5-year period, 1 out of 10 people have been evicted out of their home. 85% of those people, it was no fault of their own. Thank you.
What does that mean through no fault of their own?
In other words, they were evicted because the landlord wanted to make more money or wanted to find a way to raise the rent or something. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't because they broke something or because they violated the lease or anything like that. It was because the landlord was making a business decision.
So like, wait, how many? 85%?
85% out of the 1 out of 10 people who were evicted in the last 5 years.
Wow. Holy shit.
Right? And why? Because the pricing for housing is so high, because the rent market is so high, because they can charge that much. Like when you're like, how much should I charge for rent? You go and you look at all the other options, right? Like you see how much you can get. And often that's just because that's what you can get. That's the fair market value. You know, other people will pay more than this, blah, blah, blah. And what's worse is you have to settle for that because where else are you going to live? On the street? So there's that, but we don't talk about that. We talk about the homeless problem and we build, low-cost housing. Like, right. But how much of that low-cost housing are you going to have as more and more people get forced out of homes because they can't afford them? Right. So you're going to have more of a need for low-cost housing and the divide gets wider and there's more of a problem, but we don't want to look at that. We just want to address homelessness. And it's like we said the other day, if we really want to address any one significant problem, we have to address the foundation. And we don't want to. We don't want to. You missed all the 2012 fun in terms of like the Mayan calendar and everybody like interpreting it as, it's on this date and it's the end of the world. And it was great. And there's still people who are doing that, who are like, the world's going to end on such and such a date. I'm curious as to what it might be now. I encourage someone to go and find out what the most recent prophecy of the end of the world might be. But the point is that the reason we do that is because, frankly, the alternative is that we have to roll up our sleeves and get some shit done. So we're kind of like just, hoping it ends.
We really are. Like, that's really how I think about it. We were talking yesterday with the garbage. It's like, what do we do with it? Bury it. Like, what? It's actually like, it is straight out of Idiocracy, showing that process. But like that type of decision is just absurd. People are like, oh, what's the alternative? Like, because we have to stop being so short-sighted in order to do that. Like, we have to be willing to take a step back and look at, maybe, there's something leading to garbage issue or homelessness. Maybe we're producing a little bit too much. Maybe, some people have, we don't need to do things the way we're doing with just everything. Like maybe we can do things differently, but that takes like requires 4 or 5 steps back. Like maybe the system is not the best. Maybe there's a lot of issues with the system. Well, that sounds like too much. So the alternative is just ignoring it. The alternative is just taking your messy room and shoving it under your bed. That's really what we do. And we just like, because we have such a limited idea of ourselves in a limited body with a limited amount of years on earth, like that's our perspective is I'm here for 70, 80, 90 years. And that's it, as opposed to recognizing that your reality itself and you don't go anywhere. You're always here now and you always have been. But, there's obviously someone's going to hear that. And some people who listen to Dualistic Unity, starting from season 1 through including season 2, may understand that. But, a lot won't. There's a lot to like fucking peel back, but it just comes back to your experience here now and what you're holding on to and what stories you're telling yourself. Like that is where it starts. And eventually we get to spots where we recognize like, oh, maybe we can do things a little bit differently. But it starts with you. It doesn't start with avoiding that questioning of yourself and just running to like, oh, the system's fucked, I have to change the system. It starts with you. It starts with you.
So that's an interesting point. So I reposted a bunch of videos related to God and Christianity and interpretations of the Bible and stuff the other day, and I've been getting some fun comments ever since. And one of them, and I think this is my favorite so far, was, oh yeah, I believed we're all one awareness once, but I don't think that anymore. To which, of course, I responded, well, belief is your first problem. Don't be so quick to settle. And take some responsibility, as it were, because that's how you're going to continue to look. But the conversation went on, of course, and it's like, that's just a belief as well. How do you know we're all one awareness? To which my response was, are you aware of more than one awareness? And none of us are, which I find really interesting, because the real problem then is just our perception of division. It's our self-image. Right? Everybody wants to understand how we're all one awareness, but it's obvious. You are one awareness. It's just that you have a self-image that makes it impossible for you to reconcile that your awareness could be doing more than one thing at the same time. And it's because you have a picture of yourself as being a tiny little piece with a tiny little brain capable of doing only tiny little things. Whereas that perception of division is just a perception, but it is amplified by your self-image. The more you think that your idea of yourself is the truth, the more distorted it becomes that everything is one. Because your idea of yourself is the dividing factor. Right? Because think about it, it all comes down to your idea of yourself. You're like, oh, well, look, there's division between you and I. Look, there's space here. Okay, now you're identifying as your body. Right? And you're making a shit ton of assumptions about energy and the nature of reality, right? Where nothing is disconnected. But that's the point. It always comes down to your idea of yourself. That's the only thing that limits you from being the awareness of reality, because you are the awareness of reality. That much is obvious.
Exactly. And even like yesterday, we were talking about, questioning idea of yourself versus questioning reality and the quote unquote internal versus external, and just how eventually you start to recognize that it's just you. And so it really does come from the side of questioning what you think you are, because even when we started Dualistic Unity and I had recognized that like that whole story of Andrew isn't the reality of what I am, there was still a story. Like there was still absolutely a lot there. It was just enough of a separation that it like totally shifted. At least I wasn't taking it as, objective truth. There was enough of a recognition to see that it wasn't just what I was. And so you can't go from just questioning the external to recognizing what is. Like it really is, whatever degree you're not recognizing that everything is you, that everything is just one awareness, just one thing, is the degree to which you're not able to recognize that is the degree to which you're still maintaining an idea of yourself. So when when Dualistic Unity started, I had this perspective that, I recognized that I wasn't Andrew, but I didn't recognize myself in everything necessarily, pretty much until like our first retreat was when that insight really hit me. But the reality was that there was still just a clinging to Andrew to a degree that was hindering my ability to see myself in everything. So it wasn't so much that it was one without the other. It just wasn't enough of a degree of the one to see the rest of me.
Well said. That was well said. Absolutely. We are in a live stream. We have some questions, and this kind of ties in directly to what you're talking about in terms of moving beyond the typical assumption of what it means to let go and whatnot. So I wish y'all would get into some conspiracy theories about history and the elites controlling society. So we did actually do a community topics on secret societies. I believe it's on the Freemasons. So Dualistic Unity, community topics, Freemasons, and you'll find our thoughts there. But the point is that it's frankly time to evolve past that stupid shit. Like at the end of the day, all you're doing is entertaining the idea of separation. You're building a division between you and the quote unquote elites. This is all the product of your awareness. There is no masterful elite running the show that is somehow separate from the will of the universe itself. Like everything is a collection of everybody else's intention as well. It's not that there are 6 people at the top of this pyramid who are controlling everyone else. Do you have any idea how much that would take? Like they can influence, sure. They can change the environment, sure. But you have free will. And at the end of the day, this perspective that the elites are controlling everything is really just a way of disempowering yourself. If I was an elite, that's exactly what I'd want you to think. That's exactly what I'd want you to think. So you're more or less just doing their job for them. And you'd have to, because they can't do it without you. Even the Nazis had to get the actual citizenry to police themselves because they didn't have enough manpower, because they never have enough manpower. It's just a myth. It's just a way of us, passing the buck and not accepting that we are society. If you want to change everything, change your priorities. If you really want to undermine the system that creates the elite and the gap in between the poor and the rich, it's time to start looking at where that system comes from, which is your need to identify. And at the end of the day, vilify people.
Yeah, it really is the same as identifying with an addiction or any sort of thing like that perspective of like, oh, they must be controlling this or this must be happening. It's like recognizing a potential or recognizing a certain pattern, be it a societal pattern or an internal experiential pattern, and then not being willing to be like, maybe, but also maybe not. Like it's just settling upon a certainty, and that's the harm. So it's not really, if you're, say, alcoholic or whatever, it's not about pushing off the consideration of what's happening. It's about looking at it without identifying. And it's the same with the elites, with that sort of perspective of like, oh, Rockefeller's Illuminati, like controlling the world. It's not to say that there's nothing there, but to just say like, yes, they're controlling the world. Like going to that extent is like, yes, I'm an alcoholic, as opposed to being actually with clarity, not fucking glazed over with identity and desire for certainty. You're able to look at it and be like, okay, there's something happening here. It's not definitely this, but I'm going to keep my eyes open because it's something. It's like same when you're drinking. It's like, all right, I've recognized this is a pattern. Where's it coming from? And if you immediately are like, I'm an alcoholic, and it's like, and that becomes the problem, as opposed to everything that's leading to that. So you're avoiding looking at the root, just like when you get caught in the conspiracy theories of the elites are controlling everything and the Illuminati. It's like, that's the problem, as opposed to the entire root and everything leading up to that, and the system that's allowing for, potentially more influence for a certain group of people than another. But if you go to that extreme of like, that's it, they're controlling everything and we're all fucked forever, It's like that's avoiding everything leading up to that being a product of a given situation.
But it's funny because going back to what we were saying about Nick, the preference of almost wanting to think the world's going to end rather than thinking we can change it because that requires a lot of work. Same is kind of true with the elites. Like we would almost prefer to think that there is some masterful, shadowy organization that's running all of this and manipulating all of this and is ultimately to blame rather than it being some haphazard cluster of blind, selfish idiocy. Because that's frankly more terrifying. Like, because if there's just a small group of people, those fuckers got to go because then everything goes back to utopia. But if it really is just a collection of all of us being selfish assholes, blinding ourselves to what we're collectively doing, we don't look at that at all. We're just like, fuck, how do you address that? And so we don't. We almost would rather just give it a narrative than look at what it is. And that is ultimately what it is. Because you can have a corrupt CEO who cuts corners, puts people in danger, makes a huge profit off of a shitty product, all that stuff. Everybody's got to work for that company. More importantly, there's got to be people who are going to buy that shit. So it's not just on the corrupt CEO. It's on the environment we make for that fucker. Right? And what's worse is, where did he learn to be so corrupt? What made him so fucking selfish? The environment that he grew up in, which is us. But we keep having this perspective of division. We keep wanting to blame someone else. There's no one else. There's no one else. That idea that there's someone else is what's fucking us. Because then I don't have to give a shit about you. Do you understand? I don't have to fucking care about you if we're separate. In fact, it doesn't help me at all unless helping you helps me, in which case that's logically true. But if I don't understand that that's all based on this self-image that I'm holding on to because I'm afraid to admit I don't fucking know, it's just an infinite loop until I'm willing to question the division that goes with my self-image. And then as soon as I am, I'm slightly more willing to help you. And it's not because I recognize immediately we're all one. It's because I've stopped making so many fictional divisions. So immediately I want to be more helpful to you. Immediately I'm more empathetic. I'm more aware. I'm more in the present. They go hand in hand, is what I'm saying. You don't have to believe in unity. Don't fucking believe in unity. Just stop believing in your self-image. And what is becomes obvious. And it's all one.
Yeah, it's we really can't say it enough that it's not about believing in unity. It's not about recognizing unity or anything. It's just that there's a lot of things in the way of recognizing it. Like it's not that active belief. It's just what's left when you recognize all of the conceptual divides that you're holding on to, when you recognize all of the fictional illusions, the stories you're telling yourself about what you think you are, about what you think you're doing, about how you think you fit in. Like when those aren't there so much anymore, what's left is what is. There's nothing holding you back. There's nothing dividing you anymore. It's not about you believing in it, because that will by design hinder you from actually recognizing it. You can't recognize it while maintaining any perspective of you as something separate from reality. You can't. Like that's why it's just a conceptual unity. Like that's why it's such a conceptual unity for so many people. Like we got an email for someone requesting to be a guest, and they were kind of like going on this whole spiel about, I think they were like a channeler or something, or they thought of themselves very, very highly, this whole egotistical rant for like a full paragraph. And then they slipped in like and recognizing all of the oneness of everything. And it was just so ridiculous. I was dying laughing reading it, because it's just like ego, division, me. Recognizing oneness is important. It's like, what the fuck? That was just like 7 words that you put in, like slid into this. And that's the issue with spirituality and like that whole believing in unity thing. It's just another belief. It's maintaining your idea of yourself. Like fucking A, I don't, I feel weird even saying like it's all one, which I know we really don't do anymore because that's the product of you letting go of the perception of division. So it's not like saying it isn't even, I don't think I'm ever going to say that ever again is what I'm kind of like it's
Use it
not,
sparingly. Yeah.
yeah, right. Cause like you can't, if that is used while someone is maintaining their perception of division and any idea of themselves, even as someone, especially as someone who like has recognized unity, like that's not it. So it can't even be that. You can't even get there from believing it in any facet, in any way, shape, or form. You cannot believe it or even think of it from that perspective. Like it has to be from you. It has to be from letting go of the idea of yourself, and it's just what's left. It's not something you can add to yourself because that fucks it right in the ass right away.
Once again, well said. Appropriate choice of wording. I just wanted to actually say that this kind of goes to the follow-up question about, again, the elites controlling society and whatnot. Well, what I meant by controlling is that they already know what you guys teach and maybe more, but they let these religions preach these lies and maybe they hide real truths from society. And so right there, I want to go back to this assumption that they know. What we're saying is that all of these concepts don't mean shit and only create more destruction if you can't get out of the way. How easy do you think it is for someone who is quote unquote elite to get out of the way? That whole rich people in the eye of a needle thing, right? So they can have all the books, they can have all of the quote unquote knowledge, all the concepts, all the words, all the religions, all that shit. And it doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't mean they understand shit. Absolutely not, because if they're still looking for power, if they still believe in control, they can't fucking see it. So once again, there's the assumption they know all of this. No, what they know is control and power and how to use concepts to their advantage. What we're talking about is how to look beyond that game, which is what they don't know, which is why they're fucking trapped by it. That's why they're trapped by it. So what we're talking about here is not something the elites know, but it is something they fear because they can't understand it.
And I can hear the responses being like, well, they can know and still do that. And it's like, no, you actually can't. You can't simultaneously maintain that desire for control and power and recognize it. It's like another one of those things that's actually impossible to do. Because if you're recognizing it, there can't be that thing. And if there is some of that thing, you're not recognizing it. Like if there's some of it there, if there's some desire for that power and control, you're not fully recognizing it, whether you've seen it or not, whether you've been in that state where you're not, desiring all that shit or not. Like it's not this thing where you get to it and you're just in it coasting forever. It's a fluctuation until it isn't, but as long as it is and you're desiring that control and power and doing those things, you're not seeing it. You're not being in it. Like you're just not. It's impossible to do so. It's literally impossible. So there isn't the ability to have both. And so what we talk about isn't the reality of what it is. Like even the conversation distorts it. Like language is inherently dualistic. So even someone recognizing what we're saying without taking the responsibility of actually taking it in and looking at it and applying it for themselves, it's nothing. Like we're just making sounds into the void. Like it's someone's ability to not even like hear it and take something from it. It's just like utilize these sounds and the way you're perceiving our sounds as a way of looking at it yourself. Like it has to be from you. So you can't even listen to us and get anything without responsibility. Like that's another thing that's like fucking impossible. Like we're not doing anything for you. We're just sending things out there. And if you're willing to take responsibility, like you can derive something out of it, but it has nothing to do with us. Like these are just things that you're resonating with. because you're willing to look. So that's has nothing to do with us. So any fucking elite who like gets the conversation, that means doesn't mean jack shit.
At all, right? And it's because it's so easy to get caught up in that illusion, right? So here's a perfect example. This is another question, and I do apologize to the person who asked it because I didn't notice it amongst all the other comments. I'm curious how you guys assume that reality is only your ego's awareness of the present. Never said that, not once, but I have said that reality is only the present. You are the present. I'm the present. What makes you think those are different presents?
Yeah, right. They're not, because the only thing that's making you think that it's different is your conceptual ideas. That's it. But those aren't real. So yeah, you are the present. It's not you. Yeah, like it's not even you experiencing the present. It's just you're it. There's no you experiencing it. Like you are the experience and the experiencer. So there is no ability to say you are experiencing something, because you are both simultaneously, and there is no division, and there is no little bit of more of the experiencer than the experience. It's not that. So you are the present, which, includes experience and experiencer, but you're not more of one than the other. So it's not, you're not separate from it.
Again, it's hard for us to get, right? Like it's like Shay was asking in episode 2, which we just released last night, about like, okay, but I'm not digesting my food. It's like, aren't you though? Like all of the parts of your body that are involved with creating the chemicals that break down your food, all of the parts of your body that are individually breaking down your food, processing your food, using your food to create nutrients and all of that other fun stuff, or rather to pull good things out of, let's just say, they're all aware of their own reality from their own perspective. Every cell is self-aware, right? And so they're all participating in their own way. They're all doing their own job. They're all performing their own function, but they're all part of a whole. See, I always find it really interesting because when you talk to somebody and they're like, right, but we're not the same awareness. It's like, but you don't identify as, hi, we're a collection of cells named Ray. Like, that's not how you walk up to someone and go, hi, we're here to see you. Who's we? Well, all of us. All of the different awarenesses in my body that make up me. We think of me, it's me. But each and every one of those cells is having its own individual experience. How are we any fucking different, except for the fact that we're super committed to being the idea of an individual cell rather than part of something larger? That's it. We're just super committed to it, because if we let go of the idea, we would start to actually see it and feel it and be aware of it, because it's there, but we can't see it so long as we are thinking about the division over top. We just can't. This goes back to a question that was just asked. How does it become obvious? With each and every illusion you're willing to question. That's all it is. And just keep doing it until eventually what you find is that you're just looking at what is without your opinion of what is, without the need for a journey to what is or a journey out of not being in what is. All of that just disappears, and you find out where you are is where you've always been, which is what you've always been. And it really is that obvious. But there's a lot of stuff that immediately floods in that makes whatever I just said sound complicated.
Yeah, because like another example, I think we've talked about this in the past, on some, maybe it was a Patreon call, but how if you have, your idea of yourself and maintaining that idea of your body, like at what point does it not become you? Like say you get an arm chopped off and then you get another arm chopped off. Like you're still you, but that conceptual image has now shifted a bit. So then you get a leg cut off. So you get your other leg cut off. Then you just start carving away at different body parts, and
It's got dark.
you're not dead yet. You're still alive. Just keeps getting carved until you're like kind of alive, kind of dead. It's like, at what point is it not you? At what point was it you? Like when you break it down like that and take it to, an extreme where it's like your body gets all cut off. Like, when do you go away? Well, I think you get to a point where you say, well, when the brain shuts down and you're no longer able to maintain ideas, when you're no longer able to maintain ideas is when you end, because you're a fucking idea. Your idea of you is a fucking idea. The reality of you is not that. So in that example, you say, oh, well, I guess you stop being you when you can stop thinking about shit. It's like, so if you stopped thinking about shit right now, if you weren't maintaining a conceptual idea of yourself, what would you be? You would be what's left. You would be the entire situation that you're in, the entire experience that you're having, because there's no longer that conceptual idea of you versus you against, you compared to, you relative to. Without that, like, you are what you are because you are that now. You're just maintaining an idea that's hindering your ability to recognize that. And it's always those ideas that hinder our ability to see the reality of what we are, which is the present, which is the here and now. And like, that's the extent. It's not the story. It never has been.
And this kind of goes to a follow-up question. Sure, I can experience the present, but that is only ever subjective, as the ego is limited in its perspective of the objective. The point is that your perception is not the present. Your perception of the present isn't the present. You're mixing up the two, right? My perception of the present isn't the present because I can have any perception of the present based on my perception of myself. But perception isn't reality. The perception of division isn't the reality of division. The perception that there's a division between the observer and the observed is not a fact because there isn't one. So what remains when you let go of perception as truth is what is. And that's what is for everyone, right? That's what is for everyone because you're getting caught up in perception. And it's not about a deep psychological perspective. It's about getting caught up in your idea of yourself. I can experience the present. You've only experienced the present. That's all you've ever experienced, except that now you have a larger idea of yourself and the narrative that you've quote unquote experienced, but it's always ever just been the present. It's just that present keeps changing and you look at it as the past, which forms the idea about yourself, but that doesn't stop it from being the present. So just keep that in mind, is that your perception isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about what remains. And what remains is what is, which is all of us. The perception of division is not the truth.
I always find it so interesting how people will argue that too, like with whether it's, perception of division or the present, that whole perspective that like you can or cannot be present. Like if you think about, think back to any experience you've ever had. Where'd you experience? When did you experience it? You experienced it here and now. Like there's something to that. People, obviously, there's a fuckload to that, but people hear that and they're like, okay, yeah. And they just like write it off so quick. And it's like everything is there because everything you perceive about everything about that situation is just a perception, is just an opinion, is just a thought about it. It isn't the reality of it. And it's a perception where it's like you want to see how it fits in relative to other experiences that you've had. But like all it is that you're experiencing it here now. Like you haven't ever experienced anything outside of the here and now. Well, yesterday I ate eggs in the morning. That was yesterday. When you ate the eggs, every single taste you had, every single bite you took it here now. Like, and yeah, I mean, I guess it's just the maintenance of our idea of ourself that allows us to think that we haven't experienced that because we're maintaining stories that, quote unquote, happened in the past that allow us to believe that we're not experiencing just that in any moment, including right now. Like it's the only place you've ever seen, heard, said, tasted anything because it's what you are. Like there isn't a you separate from that. And the you that is separate from that is not you. It's just a story that you're maintaining over different experiences. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting because, so this goes to the kind of the next question. Are you guys saying that you live completely ego-free and always present in your lives? And so on the one hand, everything that we just said, we are the present, there's no real choice. Even if I think I'm thinking about the quote unquote future, I'm thinking about it here in the present. Even if I'm thinking of the quote unquote past, I'm thinking about it here in the present. And so it doesn't matter where my attention is, whether it's on the experience I'm actually having or the experience that I might possibly have or may never have or any of that. It's always the present. It may just not be the experience of being deep in the present because you're caught up in the illusion that you're thinking about. So that's one question. But this idea, are you guys saying that you live completely ego free? I want to address this very quickly because a lot of people who are new to this conversation or they're kind of lost in the non-dual philosophy or spirituality or any of that stuff have this idea that the ultimate end of this journey is to be magically free of the ego. And yet to them, freedom means never seeing it again. Does that sound like freedom or fear? See, freedom to me, being free of the ego, is to be able to look at it, understand it, use it as a tool by understanding how it works and looking at the influence that it has and where that comes from and why it's so easy to fall into. See, freedom to me is awareness of the ego. It's not escaping the ego. That's just fear, in which case it's got you firmly by the balls.
Because yeah, I mean, you have this idea, and it's very common desire perspective to be rid of the ego. And my response to that is like, what? You don't think you can handle it? You don't think you can handle it? Like, are you that limited that you don't think you can handle a little fucking idea? Like, are you that afraid? Are you perceiving yourself to be that limited? It's the same sort of limited perspective of the idea of yourself, the idea that you should never experience the ego anymore. It's like, are you so scared of it? Like, it's not actually a a component of reality. It's a component of reality because we maintain it. It's not actually a component of reality. Like, it's not a component of what is. It's rooted around a bunch of perspectives of what is that you are identifying as. But yeah, I mean, it's silly because all of that comes from the perspective that the ego is a bad thing, and it's not. Like, it's not a bad thing. Stop thinking it's a bad thing. It's your ability to have this experience, to have experience. The ego is necessary because the ego is just the perspective of division, the perception of division, not the reality of it. That's something that actually exists. But yeah, it's all of this, like, nothing is divided. That doesn't mean it's not real. Like, it's as real as you are. Like, in each and every moment, each experience that you have here and now, whether you're dreaming or awake, is able to be experienced because, oh fuck, hold on, where was I going? Whether you're dreaming or awake here now, everything's still real here now. It's always you here now, no matter where you are, and your idea and your opinion and your perspective and your judgment of you relative to being here now, relative to other people that you perceive. Like, it's not actually you. Like, it's just a perception. Like, it's not the reality of what is.
But what a mind fuck. Like, think about it. I want to figure out what this is. Fuck. That's it. It's like as soon as you stop to think about it, you're done, right? You've stopped processing what it actually is, because what it is process. So you've stopped the process to kind of go, what's happening? And in doing so, you're not processing what's happening, which is why it's so fucking confusing, because you're not in it anymore. So when you start asking question after question after question, how am I doing this? Am I doing this right? What's that person doing? Where's my value in this? Blah, blah, blah. Eventually, you just lose all touch with what is entirely. You know, this is something I think is really interesting. Like, as a teenager, many of us will remember this, though probably not specifically like this. There is this habit that we got into of taking something personally and then our emotion changing just a little bit and then not being aware that our emotion changes how we react to everything, and then taking something else personally, leaving something else personally, thinking something else personally, and it's a fucking cascade. Before you know it, you're in like a shitty situation or a shitty mood, feeling alone or isolated or resentful or any of those things. And it's because you're not aware of that cascade, right? And then eventually you get a little older and you start going, oh, I gotta catch this shit before it like gets carried away. And that's what you start to recognize is, oh, I gotta catch this shit before it gets carried away, because the cascade makes it impossible to deal with once it's going. Once it's going, it's so hard to stop. Like you're gonna end up in the fetal position crying, right? But if you can catch it early on, if you can gain some sensitivity for how the cascade happens, for how the thoughts lead from one to the other, how they bring you down in this spiral of perceived worthlessness, well, then all of a sudden you're not as likely to get sucked into it. And as you don't get sucked into it, you're left with what remains before the cascade, which was life, which was reality, which was where you were free of your opinion and preference and fear. But as soon as that first domino falls, now you're running to catch up, right? Unless you're aware of where it's all coming from. And then they stop falling because you're not so inclined to chase them.
Exactly. And that's what staying on the ball really is just being willing to recognize it for what it is, as opposed to like ignoring the initial components, not even ignoring, but it's just being distracted enough to allow for that cycle and spiral to even begin, because again, you're maintaining that idea of yourself to be the truth. So it's like this, yeah, it really is like this loop of identifying as something specific, maintaining that, not recognizing that that's not the reality of what you are. Something happens, must mean something about that, which reinforces that idea. And it just keeps looping and looping and spiraling further and further down. And so it has to be the willingness to recognize that that idea that you hold on to, your perception of how something went, your idea of your value, your assumption of your value is never the truth. As soon as there's an inkling of that being the truth, it's going to send you on a fucking loop. It's going to send you on a ride. And it's just when you recognize that it isn't, or you don't recognize that it's never the truth, and you're spiraling and you get a little breath of fresh air because something else makes you feel a little bit better about yourself. And that's basically fucking society, is just that, like a spiral with some intermissions of feeling a little bit better about myself, and then still maintaining that idea. So we're not escaping the idea. We're just fucking fluctuating up and down, up and down, up and down, because we're not willing to look at it for what it is and take responsibility for the recognition that I'm not just that, because then a lot more comes into play. There's a lot more sensitivity to things, and not need, but like just ability to look at everything else, and everything else that you are is a lot, but it's never more than you, because like it's you. So if you're feeling like it's a lot, it's just relative to a fucking perspective that you're maintaining of yourself as being something limited, because a lot is relative too. I'm just like realizing that as I'm saying it, but it's, yeah, oh man. Yeah.
I find it really funny because our identity-based society is circling the drain in so many ways, like in terms of the economy, in terms of just world peace. I mean, we're closer and closer to midnight on the doomsday clock, in terms of climate change and the environment and stuff like that. Like, we're just circling the drain. It's just that we've been doing it for so long that we've built like luxury condos around the drain. So we're under the impression like this is just normal now. Like, what could happen? It's like it could all just fall apart, like regardless of how comfortable you are and how much you've managed to stop yourself from the descent to some degree. You really haven't. Like, we're still dealing with all of these extra consequences that are largely the result of a lack of awareness collectively. That's really what all of our problems come down to, is the fact that we're not working together because we don't perceive each other as one. We have no reason to work together, right? Which is why we need government. We need to be able to vote for somebody, right? They're going to fix shit, right? Because again, the alternative is getting to know your neighbors, not digging into Netflix or your phone quite so often, saying hi to the person at the grocery store, or possibly supporting, some local artisan, things like that. Just being human. I mean, nothing has to be radically revolutionary for it to have an impact at all. If all of us, bought a little less needless shit, it would shake the tree. The fact is that we all kind of want that shit. Like, here's a perfect example. There's a group of people right now that are protesting Royal Bank of Canada in the city that I live in. And they're doing so because Royal Bank is invested in a lot of the petroleum projects that are happening in British Columbia, as well as with BC Hydro cutting down a lot of the old growth forests. And so a lot of investment comes through Royal Bank and goes to these terrible, terrible things that nobody wants. But everybody who's down there is wandering down, buying a coffee, getting lunch from businesses that get a loan from Royal Bank, right? More likely driving downtown in cars using gasoline that is once again financed by Royal Bank. So it's not as simple as we'd like it to be. We can't just look at the banks and go, "You're evil. Excuse me," while I go to Starbucks.
Right? It's so interesting how we don't want to take that extra couple steps back, like, because it's a little bit less comfortable to do that. Like, it's all self-validation. Like, it really is. Like, it's fucking egotistical masturbation doing that shit. Like, going, man, it's such like, I don't want to say it's so obvious, but like it's so obviously just focusing on a fucking product of a given mentality while you continue doing so. And the reason that you're doing it, I get if it's like, you care about the environment and all that, but like, it really comes down to you and how you view yourself, and you're viewing yourself in a more positive light because you're, taking this action and doing this thing. And as long as that's the case, it's like your intentions on the surface can seem great, but it's reinforcing everything that's fueling the thing that you're protesting. Like, we don't recognize that because we don't want to, because we don't want to take responsibility, because it does mean that we have to take another look at fucking everything, at everything that we're doing. We have to take a newfound set of eyes and take a peek at all of it. And so we'd rather just fucking feel better about ourselves by going to protest some stuff while continuing to fuel the root of the reason for the thing that we're protesting, which is fucking, I mean, you got to kind of think it's funny, or else you're just going to get really angry. But yeah, it's just fascinating.
Absolutely. I just wanted to mention very quickly, we have a retreat coming up August 24th, mini retreat in Vermont, August 24th to August 28th. It's in this fucking awesome cabin. I'm really excited about this. There's a pool table, there's a pinball machine, fucking great. There's this beautiful yard and a pond and some benches by that pond. There's a hot tub, big deck. It's going to be just an awesome time of just hanging out, having this conversation face to face, no mute button, no group Zoom, nothing like that. It's just us being in the present, or rather being the present together. So if you can make it, we would love to see you. Early access is still available for tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 on Patreon. Each tier does get a different discount. Tier 3 saves $350 on a retreat ticket. Tier 2 saves $150. Tier 1 saves $50. And considering the prices for the tiers, it's absolutely worth it to do that if you're going to come to the retreat. Even if you want to upgrade to tier 3 for 1 month to get that $350 savings, do that. Absolutely. And you'll even get a free chance to chat with either Andrew or I for 25 minutes if you do that.
Oh yeah. I was kind of reading the comments. I heard you were doing announcements. I was trying to get through some of these. So there's 2 here. Opinion on healing crystals and what would society look like if everyone realized we are one. So I mean, the healing crystals we've talked about that stuff, any sort of tools like that is, there's ounces of truth from, yes, there is some sort of energetic thing involved, but if you're utilizing it as a way to pass off responsibility to something else, to another thing, you're just creating another crutch and another excuse, and it's not actually doing the extent of the things that you believe it to be doing. And so, yeah, everything that's measured by it is like, it's just another way to worship something outside of yourself, reinforce the idea of yourself, not be able to recognize yourself and everything else, because now you're someone who does crystal. I mean, that's the identifying part, is like, I'm a crystal person. If you're saying something like that, that's defining it. The crystals themselves, like, there's something there, but again, it's ounces of truth, gallons of snake oil.
Absolutely. Which isn't to say that crystals aren't cool. Crystals are cool. I've always been intrigued by crystals, for sure. I did want to address something quickly. Somebody was saying, and this was a follow-up to a question earlier, but they were saying the ego receives from outside itself, from non-ego consciousness, aka you're unconscious. Okay, so here's the problem with that. The ego can't help but perceive outside itself, but there is no outside itself. Like, the perception that you're receiving anything is because you're identifying. Right? You're not receiving anything from anywhere. There is no pure consciousness. There is nothing that's bringing you information. You are not your ego, but as long as you perceive yourself to be, then you are receiving from some other source. And this is why we say that the crux of all of this is responsibility. Because if you're not willing to be responsible solely as existence itself, you will always want to believe that perception of division. You will always want to see yourself as your ego, right? But perception is not truth. So the external that you're perceiving is just a perceived external. The awareness that you're aware of, or the universe that you're aware of, is your awareness. You've never known anything but your awareness. The perception of internal and external is just an assumption.
Well said.
Thank you.
I have nothing to add.
Well, I do want to have one more quick answer here, because I know we're wrapping up in about 10 minutes. If anybody would like to join us on Patreon after this, do that, because it's going to be like 3 hours of conversation. You can be on screen, you can ask us questions, you can talk to us, you can get into this stuff in more depth. So you don't believe that the Earth is a certain amount of years old, like estimated 14 billion years. This is, I guess, one of those questions that's unfortunately not as simple as you'd like it to be. So you perceive time as this linear event, right? But time is only ever the moment. So while, yeah, you can look at the experience of linear time and measure that, the fact is that you're always doing so from here and now. And this is why I really enjoy Einstein's perception of the Big Bang, as opposed to most people's perception of the Big Bang, that the Big Bang wasn't the beginning of time. The Big Bang was the creation of all time. It was creation of all moments, from the beginning to the end of what could possibly be. But that also means every variation of every moment. So what you're asking is only based on the perception of linear time, whereas the reality is that it's just a perception of linear time, right? So it's not to negate the fact that the Earth is that quote unquote old. But on the other hand, each and every moment of the Earth's existence exists at the same time, and has forever, and will forever, because what is always is, and what is ultimately potential. There's a lot to this question. If you enjoy this conversation, go and check out episode 1 of the Dualistic Unity podcast. We're obviously not going to get to everything here. And this is the other thing about these questions. There's so much that you're never going to get to one answer and go, aha, I got it, because it's you that's changing, right? It's not the insight that you're looking for. It's the process of you unraveling all of the stuff that's in your way and making it difficult to establish any degree of clarity. So it's not some concept you're going to be like, that's the truth. That's the problem, is that mentality that's looking for, that's the truth, because you're just trying to settle on something so you don't have to be responsible, and keep churning away at things, keep looking, keep gaining more consideration, more context, more awareness. Just want to take the easy road, right? Just find that answer. That is the truth. Now I believe that, therefore I'm good to go. That's not what this is about. It's not. So if you're interested It's not just about any of the answers that we might give in these episodes. It's an ongoing discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. And you can participate in it by watching the episodes or listening to the episodes, or better, join us in a group. Have this conversation with us week to week. We will be there to help share in your insights and to share our own victories and insights and lessons that we've learned along the way, because that's what this is, an ongoing discussion. It's just embodying change rather than trying to settle on something that is falsely not changing, or at least has the perception of not changing, even though of course it is.
That's why we want, like, we just want the easy answer so often. Like, we just want, I have a question, I want the answer, and I want to be able to settle upon that. And I want to be able to be certain, because that'll make me comfortable. But reality can never be settled upon. So anything in reality also can't be settled upon. So it has to be an ongoing discussion. It has to be a conversation for it to remain in reality. And I just find it interesting how, people will gravitate so much more to, a certain video or something that like has an answer to it, despite it not being it. Like, we'll take just something as opposed to a process, like going through a process. That's why we have over 200 episodes, because it's an ongoing conversation. Like, the things people ask about, even just, what was that other one? Something about ego, or, experiencing ego. Like, can you experience life without ego or whatever? And it's like, no, experience necessitates ego to a degree, but like, there is so much behind that. It's not like we couldn't even spend an entire live stream talking about a question like that, or even the question of, is how old is Earth? What do you think about that? What do you think about the beginning of time? It's like, or what do you think about death? And it's like, there is so much behind that. There's so much assumption and confusion, even in coming to a question like that. There is so much settled upon in the questioning of that, and the assumption of being able to get an answer immediately. Like, there's just so much leading up to all of this that we couldn't, like, it can't just be this this black and white answer, because then it's not it. Like, there has to be the buildup, there has to be the nuance, there has to be the willingness to look at different perspectives and realize, like, oh, maybe there isn't an answer. Maybe you're the answer, but there's a lot in the way of that recognition.
Oh, for sure. This is why one of my favorite responses from somebody when they want to get into the weeds of this, or at least they say they do, and so they're like, "This is my counterpoint. Is we're just not all one. We're just not, that kind of thing." And I'll be like, "That's interesting. You should go and check out episode 1 of the podcast. Maybe go through season 1." Oh, well, that seems like a lot of time. If you can't just sum it up quickly, it's like, then it's really not that fucking important to you, is it? Like, it's just, at the end of the day, you just want to feel right and walk away and boost your value a little bit, in which case this isn't about you actually coming to any degree of recognition at all. You're just masturbating at the end of the day and using me as porn. And I'm not interested at the end of the day, because I'm actually, enjoying my life. I don't need you. I don't need you to believe me. I don't need you to agree with me. In fact, I'd prefer if you didn't. I prefer if you wanted to have a discussion about it. I'd prefer if you actually take it upon yourself to go, all right, I'll give this a little bit of credibility and just hear it out. Because I'm fairly fucking confident if you did, it would start to make sense. But it comes down to the fact that we want a quick answer, and this isn't one. We want something we can just believe in, and this is not that. This is not about coming to a conclusion. This is about being free of the need for one. That's all it is, right? And not being afraid of living in the ongoing process that is living. Right? But that's what we are. We're afraid of it. And so we put the brakes on, we try and establish some sense of control, we try and establish some sense of division, and we live in those assumptions, and we don't recognize that we do so. Right. And so whenever what's funny is that when we suffer like that, because of that, somebody comes over and they're like, "Oh, did you know such and such?" And we're like, "Yeah, well, that's not solving my suffering now." It's like, Right, but you spent a lot of time investing in the suffering. Like, you really expect it to just go away now, like after like 5 minutes of exploring that you're suffering? Because it won't. It takes some fucking time.
Yeah, even with any degree of a recognition that you're not what you think, there's still a lot holding on, like holding that in the way or holding it at bay or holding it up. It's like you can recognize that it isn't it, but there's still a lot that's been invested in that has to be worked through. The recognition itself is another non-silver bullet. Like having a quote unquote awakening doesn't mean shit if you don't do something with it. It doesn't mean shit if you're not willing to dig into the things that still make you uncomfortable, that be willing to continue to question any ideas you settled upon, especially the one where it's like, I'm someone who had an awakening. Like, holy fucking shit. How brutal is that? That as you recognize you're not what you think, use that recognition of recognizing that you're not what you think to then define yourself. Like, God damn. But yeah, you have to be willing to look. You have to be willing to look for yourself. And it has to be enough of a priority for you. Because if not, like, and you're suffering, you're gonna keep going through it until it is enough of a priority for you. That's all we're seeing with this community being built, like with Dualistic Unity being a thing. It's just people are making it a priority. They've had enough of the bullshit. They've had enough of the perception of division, of the false certainty, of the illusions that they've clung to temporarily feel a little bit better. Like, there gets to be a point where it's like, all right, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves. I'm willing to stay on the ball. I'm willing to not validate and my perception of myself and believe it to be the truth of what I am. I'm willing to continue to remain uncertain about what's going on because I've been through the alternative and it's not worth it.
But like every other toxic addiction, it's about a deepening recognition. Like, it's not about just one recognition. Oh my God, I'm addicted to this, because that likely isn't going to change it, because you've spent a lifetime building habits that perpetuate that addiction. So while you might have a recognition that maybe slows up those habits are still being formed just habitually all the time, because you've done so in so many other moments. You've habitually learned to build these walls up, whether you recognize you're doing it or not. You are actually that intelligent. You are actually that powerful. Your brain can do that shit. It's building up habits that you formed years and years and years ago, and you're not even aware of it. They're reflexive now, right? And so it's not just getting to the recognition that you have an addiction. It's deepening that recognition, which means doing more than identifying with the addiction. It means looking at where the addiction came from, right? Which means courage and self-honesty and the willingness to let go of who you think you are. We're just addicted to identity. We're addicted to division and the perception of it, because again, and we've talked about this before, it allows me to be a selfish prick. It means I can get what I want and I don't have to consider you. Despite the fact that in the long term, that actually ends up hurting me. I don't see it because I don't want to. This has been a great episode. We're going to continue in 15 minutes on Patreon for another 3 hours. We have a tier 2 call and tier 3 call. If you can join us, please do. These conversations are great. And if not, we're going to do a free group next Wednesday and every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. You can register at dualistiCunity.com.